Estamos de volta recebendo hoje Stan Captain, Advisor on Education da República da Estônia, discutindo o impacto da inteligência artificial na educação. E nós estávamos falando no bloco anterior sobre o processo de ensino-aprendizagem. Stan, in the last part of our program, we were talking about the teaching trainings that are being held in Estonia and how AI is changing the teaching process. Please tell us some more about these trainings and your ideas on how the teaching process will change with AI, please.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that we are already seeing, and I'm sure all teachers have seen this, we have heard feedback from both our teachers in our schools and also our professors in universities, where they're telling us that some of the tasks that they have given their students before, they cannot give their students these tasks anymore, that things have to change. So professors are doing things like, instead of asking students to write some sort of final essay that will make up the majority of their grade for their course, they have told students that we're going back to we're going to be talking about the subject. So instead of a written exam, there's going to be an oral exam. So this is some of the things that our professors are now doing, for example. So in schools, what we see is a little bit of a similar trend where some written tasks are not useful anymore because it can be very easy for students just to replicate this, just to ask ChatGPT to write an essay for them, for example. Now, it is very important to note here that we want the students ultimately to be making conscious decisions about their homework, which means that just because they have the opportunity to use ChatGPT, of course, we don't want them to do that. What we do want and what we hope, the end goal for us is for students to really understand and learn to use text bots as assistants. So instead of telling the text bots, hey, solve this mathematical equation or write an essay on this topic for me, they might instead go and say, hey, I'm working on this equation, but I'm having a little bit of trouble. Can you help me? What might be the next step for me to take? What is the missing bit of knowledge that I'm lacking that you can tell me or hint at that I can use then to solve the equation myself? So this is a conscious process that we're going through, but it might seem small, but it's actually part of a much bigger kind of educational philosophy, if you say. So when we look at, for example, the Estonian education strategy, we see all sorts of very beautiful things written in there, like personalizing education, like self-directed learners, right? Student-centered learning, for example. In Estonia, we also talk about a contemporary approach to learning, which is kind of like an Estonian understanding or version of more student-centered learning philosophy, if you will. Now, what that means is that we really want, and I think most teachers, this is what they're looking for. They want students to have a certain amount of intrinsic motivation. They want students to be really interested in what they're doing so that the students become a more active part of the process. So AI can really help with some very simple things here. If we have a classroom, we have one teacher, we have 25 students, maybe 20 students, maybe 30 students, maybe more, maybe a little less. And let's say one of our classes is 45 minutes. It is impossible to ask of the teacher that he or she can devote personal time and approach each student personally, really understanding where they are. So we're hoping that on one hand, the technology helps maybe at some point in the classroom to give particular feedback to that student that helps the student move forward. And that also from an administrative point of view, that it helps the teacher maybe it does some of the marking work. It makes that easier. It does some of the marking you can maybe automate, and then the teacher can have a look and see where she can add some things. Or, for example, that teachers can gain time from getting help in class preparation. So this is some of the feedback that we've been getting from our teachers, is that they'll say, hey, I have this task that I made for my students. Usually it's taken me 30 minutes to put this together. Now, with the help of AI, it's only taken me 5 minutes. And here's how I did it. And then they have a group on Facebook, for example, and they'll share their experience. And we're hoping that all of this time that we're saving with some of the more mundane tasks, the teachers can really use this time to talk with their students and to really get to know their students and have a personal approach to their students. Now, it's important to note that when we are talking about training our teachers, and we are talking about beautiful things like personalized education and self-directed learners and so on, we are talking more and focusing more on this idea of educational psychology and some of the precepts and ideas within that frame. So for example, when we're currently planning our teacher course. We already have some things done, but this is a big process and we're working on it. One of the things that we are very adamant about, that we feel very strongly about, is this idea that the course for teachers, their AI course, will also have to involve, or will have to have, an integrated element of metacognition in it. So metacognition works very well with this idea of a self-directed learner. And metacognition also works very well with the idea of how to really use AI. So metacognition is this idea of you being conscious of your own thought processes, how you solve certain problems, and how you try to find solutions to whatever task you may be doing in the classroom. So a good example is when you use AI and you're trying to get a particular answer from the AI, you have to, consciously or unconsciously, you're thinking about, how do I frame this question so that the AI can give me the answer that I'm looking for? When you do that, you are engaging in a metacognitive process. So we are seeing that if, our kind of fundamental, like the basis that we are working on as a nation, is this idea that we have to be able to learn how to use AI well. And that has really led us down this path. Okay, but then we really need to understand metacognition better. And when we start to talk about having to understand metacognition better, that actually brings us back to this whole educational philosophy we have, that where we want more self-directed students. We want them to be really active participants in their work and really to reflect on their own work. So we don't want the students just to be there as inanimate objects that the teacher is speaking at, and that they don't feel like they are part of the process. So we really see AI in a strange way, in a very roundabout way, as empowering many of the things that we already want to do. Personalized learning will be something that we're really interested in, something that we're really looking forward to. It's this idea that a student can follow his or her interests a little more, at a pace that is a little bit more suitable to them, and maybe using a certain learning strategy that is a little bit more helpful for them. Now, it's important to note here, and I'll refer back to this idea of balance that you mentioned before. We are not heading toward this direction of having students sit in a computer class from 9 a.m. in the morning to whatever, 3 or 4 or 5 p.m. in the afternoon. That is absolutely not what we're doing. We definitely want students to have this moment where they can maybe work on a personal project just by themselves, where they set goals with a teacher and they are conscious in the process, really thinking through it, really passionate about it. But we also are expecting students to work a lot collectively, work in groups, and also, for example, work outside, spend time outside, and so on. So AI will, we're hoping, really raise the quality of the time that is spent between teachers and students. That when we think about education, sometimes we might get the feeling that education is incredibly inefficient. When we look at our classrooms, we might look at our students and say, how many of these students in the classroom are really engaged in the process? How many of them are really turned on, really passionate about what they're doing? Instead, what we might see is that maybe half of the students more or less understand what's going on. Maybe a quarter of the students are already bored because this is way too easy for them. And maybe you'll have a quarter of students who find that this is extremely hard, and that they have actually, for the last 5 classes, they don't really understand or know what's going on. So you try to find that, for example, you might change the way the class is working. You might split the class into two in terms of time. You might have students working together on something where they're all in the same place, some topic that they all understand, and then they can work on that together. But then you'll also have blocks of time where students can kind of identify where their missing pieces of knowledge are and really work on that. So these are some of the ways where we're hoping that it will help. But yes, as I mentioned, in a strange way, it's machine learning, it's AI that is ultimately, it seems like, showing us a way back to ourselves, that we have to become very conscious of our own actions when we are working with AI. And I think this only makes sense because there is this idea that with great power comes great responsibility. So when you're using such a powerful tool as an AI, you have to be very self-conscious. You have to really understand and be present with the technology.
That's very, very fascinating, because we really can change education not only by turning it more in a certain way efficient, like in the same way that it is like being going like right now, but we can turn this education into something that is more efficient concerning what we really need as human beings to be healthy. So you are a philosopher and an economist, and you have a multidisciplinary perspective of many issues, and of course about AI as well. So how do you think AI can help bridge the gap between traditional education models and these needs? Practically, tell us some projects maybe that you have seen that have worked, or something more that can add to this subject.
As you mentioned, and this ties in with some of the things we've been discussing today, and some of your very good comments also in the mix, that it is very strange to see how there is a path open to us where AI coming into our lives will actually, hopefully, and this is a conscious choice that we have to make, will make space and time for us to really have a better experience with education. An experience that talks to each individual more than before. At the same time, also, there is a social aspect to all of this. So we understand that all of the steps that we are taking now, we really have to understand the longer play, where we're going to be headed. So for us, we're definitely, once again, we're definitely trying to make sure, because it's still the question of balance. It's still the question of how staying human in an age of technology. So I think the important thing here is maybe something that I would want all of the listeners to think about, and it's something that we're thinking about in Estonia as well, is this idea that we really need to consider a positive future scenario of AI within education. Because at the moment, you can also see there is a lot of fear about education and what happens to education if AI comes in, what happens to our students when AI comes in. But we need to really think about the positive scenario and see how AI can assist us in maybe doing things better that we weren't able to do before, because we are hoping that AI will help us, give us a little bit more energy and time to work with our students. So instead of so this is a big important point that we have been talking about here in Estonia as well. It's very important to think about the risks associated with AI. It's very important also to consider the legislation. When you are using AI, it needs to be legal. You need to do it in the right way that respects the privacy of the students, for example. Those are two very important things. But you cannot forget the importance of the technology itself and how it can have an effect on everything that we're doing. So instead of saying that the legislation comes first and that affects the technology, you might also want to say that the technology maybe will have an effect on the legislation. So my final message would be, to think about the positive aspects and to think about the positive scenario of AI in education for all the countries. That will help better navigate so that you don't get lost in the fear.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a fascinating interview. Thank you very much. E assim, chegamos ao fim de mais um programa de Agora Entrevista. Muito obrigada a vocês, Stan Captain, e a vocês que nos acompanharam. Não esqueçam de seguir o nosso canal no YouTube e também assistir o programa através da UNB TV. Até a próxima!